Charter School Radio through all of your friends, relatives, and neighbors. We want to get the word out there and keep spreading the word nationwide about the great things that are going on with the charter school movement, and even addressing some of the problems along with the charter school movement. Obviously, there are some charter schools that aren't doing that well, and the great thing is, guess what? They can go out of business. Public schools that are doing a poor job, guess what? They stay in business, and in fact, the government gives them more money and see if they can't do a better job. Once again, if you want to contact me, you can go to echs.org. That's echs.org, and you can contact me there. You can also go to Charter School Radio or wsradio.com and click on the different shows that are there. It'll take you to the Charter School website, and you can look at some of the past shows we've had. You can listen to them. You can download them, do a podcast. So they're all archived there. All of our shows over the last year or two here, you can go back, and we've had some great guests on, some great topics, and hope you'll check that out. But our next guest here is with the Ayn Rand Center for Individual Rights, the Ayn Rand Institute. They're part of that. And his name is Tomas Bowden. I think it's Bowden. Bowden. And he's a specialist, deals with the Supreme Court situation. He deals with individual rights, antitrust, abortion, assisted suicide, labor laws, and this one really, the multiculturalism, which is what we kind of want to talk about today. And then Columbus Day, and I want to talk a little bit about that if we have time. But Mr. Bowden, welcome to Charter School Radio.
All right, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you with us, and I appreciate you taking time. I know you're busy, and it's a little bit later where you're located, and you are here with us, so I want you to know we really appreciate that.
This is my work and what I live to do, so I'm happy to be here.
So real quick for our listening audience, why don't you just talk a little bit about the Ayn Rand Institute and how you got involved in it and what their purpose is, because a lot of people may not be familiar with it.
Yeah, sure. The Ayn Rand Institute was named after Ayn Rand, who was a 20th century novelist and philosopher. She wrote The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, books which a lot of your listeners will
still number one seller today. I think it's still going off the shelves.
Yeah, it's with all the political shenanigans lately, the sales are way up.
Yeah,
that book. And the Ayn Rand Institute was formed in 1985 to get Ayn Rand's ideas out into the big debates in the culture, such as the debates over education and its future. Because Ayn Rand had a whole philosophy. She had something to say about ethics, something to say about politics, about how we know what we know, and educational curriculum, a whole lot of different things. So our job is to basically speak to people like your listeners and just try to get them a little bit interested in a different perspective. So I'll have a different perspective to offer on charter schools and on education than I think any of your other guests would have to offer.
And that's what we want. We want to get different ideas. One of our mottos is, this is a place where great minds discuss ideas. And that's what we want to do so we can inform the listeners, and then they can make up their own mind what they think is the right thing. But the one reason I wanted to have you on is I had heard you on one of our local shows here on 760 KFMB, Mike Slater's show, I believe it was, a few weeks back. And one of the topics was talking about kind of the trend, and now I don't know how big of a trend it is. I guess I just kind of picked up on it in the middle, but it was about how they're talking about how only African Americans can teach African Americans, and how they're going back to separating the students out and the multiculturalism kind of things that are coming back into our schools again. And I kind of wanted to get your take on that and pick up on that topic.
Yeah, I know it's a really interesting one. There's so much to say about education, and this is, to start off on multiculturalism is to start off on kind of a big, negative in public education. And we can talk about some positive things later about education, where we could go from here. But the situation with multiculturalism is really difficult because what's happening in the schools, and of course it's happening in the larger culture, but especially in the schools, is a trend that you might think of as tribalism. And it's the idea that what you do is you submerge your individual identity as a child, as a student, into the tribe, into the group. Now, how are these groups formed? Well, it's on the basis of the most trivial and meaningless perceptual facts about you. Your skin color, your gender, your disability, your language, where you were born, your sexual practices. All these things give rise to groups that are thought to have their own way of thinking, their own way of behavior, and they're seen as not being able to really communicate well with other tribes, other groups. And so they wind up being separated out. And then, so step one is you kind of figure out what tribe you belong to. Am I a Hispanic? Is that my group? If I'm deaf, do I join deaf culture? If I'm a woman, do I join the woman culture? Or if I'm gay, do I join the gay culture? So step one is you're encouraged to find your personal identity in the group as opposed to finding it in your own character and your own choices. And then step two is all these tribes get pitted against each other in the form of pressure groups. So you find the educational establishment beset on all sides with pressure groups wanting more funding, more curriculum, more privileges, more money spent for the disabled, for gays and lesbians, for blacks, for whites, for Hispanic.
You name it.
You name it, and it's out there.
There's a special interest group for all of that, and honestly, that's what drives some of our state budgets and our federal budgets in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and it's not that they think, one is better than the other. It's not that. They think it's all different, and no group is any better than the other, but they're all different, and so they all have to vie for power. So you get this pressure group warfare, which right now takes place, in Congress. It takes place in legislative meeting rooms, but it's not going to be too long before it goes to where all warfare among gangs ultimately goes, which is physical force and confrontation. We got to stop going down that road before we get there.
And in your opinion, based on your research and what you've seen, how are we going to stop that downhill slide? Because it seems like for a long time, it just seems like we're getting back into balkanization, like you said, kind of that tribalism idea. Yeah. And rather than, if you're here, let's just use the United States as our example, whether you're in Europe or whatever country you come from. If you're here, the whole original idea was that we would be a melting pot and people would become Americans, and they would be proud of that and want to be part of that culture and learn from that. They could still keep their traditions and things that the family background and holidays, things that they want to keep within their family, but it just seems like we've gotten away from that e pluribus unum type idea, and that out of many one, it's just like we reversed that thing, that everybody's got to have their own thing.
Yeah, it doesn't just seem like we've gotten away.
Well, that's where we are.
We've thrown it out completely. The whole idea of the American melting pot was not to become like a collective American.
Right.
The whole American ideal was a nation of individuals who would be judged, equal before the law and judged in private life by their merit, by their character, by what they deserve. So how much you get paid, how much respect you get from your from your neighbors, all depends on you and your choices.
Yeah.
And that individualism is what Ayn Rand stood for. It's what we have. If we're going to talk about what education could be and what it should be, we have to start talking about individualism and reason.
Right. And again, I think I know my wife, I did read the, obviously, one of her books. I have not run We the Living. My wife said that's probably one of her best books. I've got to read that one yet.
It's excellent.
Yeah, that's my wife said she liked that better than Atlas. That took a long time for me to get through Atlas, but it's well worth reading. Anybody that's never read any of her work needs to read it, because she was so far ahead of her time. But when you read, according to my wife, when you read We the Living, it's just it really depicts what's going on in our society today. And this was written, I can't remember when it was written, but...
it was written in the 1930s. And 1930s. It was a semi-autobiographical story of Ayn Rand and her life in Russia.
Coming from Russia and what she put up with. And no, it's the
story of a young individual woman who's struggling against the oppression of the state. And it really, for any of your listeners who are interested in young people and education, it's maybe her most accessible book from that perspective.
Right. Well, I think it should be required reading, and unfortunately, in our colleges and our schools today, I guess they don't believe in that. We try to, but let's go. Let's get into a little bit. You've kind of explained what, and I agree with you. Everything you're saying, I agree with, and that's the challenge we have in education. And not that we have all the answers, but I know at our particular, I happen to run a couple of charter schools here in California, and our whole thing has been about challenge the individual to do better than they ever thought they could do. Not look at them as I don't care what they look like, who they are. Obviously, we have some standards and expectations for our students, but it's really about building young men and women of character that aren't afraid to challenge themselves and be proud of the opportunities and privileges they have in a free nation like we have here in the United States, because I think we take that way too much for granted. And as Martin Luther King said, obviously, we'd rather judge you by the content of your character. We have about a minute left in this segment, but so when we come back, I really want to get into some of your ideas of how we can solve that problem and hear from you that. We got about 5 seconds here. So, Tom, when we come back, we'll get into that discussion about what some of your thoughts are and how we can maybe turn that around, okay?
Sounds good. I'll be here.
All right. We'll be right back with our guest, again, Tom Bowden, with the Ayn Rand